Chapter 10. As his private jet circled over Walker's Island, Gabe looked down to the surface below, pleased that his great-grandfather's island was now his own. He had his new wife in name only to thank for this huge blessing in his life. Turning, he peered over at Rory, who sat reading a book on her seat across the table. She was so beautiful, and he was beginning to realize a real temptation for him. Yesterday, when they got back to the hotel, he would have gladly continued kissing her sweet lips, if not for that phone call. However, it wasn't only her outward beauty that drew her to him, it was her inward beauty and compassion. The way she had helped Maria, and how she had bravely talked to Maria's family about partnering with her in the skincare business was admirable. He discovered a new side to his childhood friend that was incredible. He admired her for not avoiding what was happening with Maria, but for trying to figure out a solution. None of the other women he dated would have cared enough to try to help someone else like that. From his experience, they would have thought that someone who served them wasn't worth their attention. Clearly, he'd been wrong about a few assumptions he'd made about Rory. He could admit that. Yet he couldn't forget that she was only his fake wife. He needed to try to refocus and get back to the deal they agreed on. The harder he tried, the more difficult it became to hold himself back from kissing her senseless. His wife was becoming more and more irresistible to him. How was he supposed to keep treating her like a sister when he definitely didn't have brotherly feelings towards her? Gabe needed a way to show Rory his good intentions. "Rory, do you want a bird's-eye view of Walker's Island? Take a look out the window." Gabe pointed below to the view they could see from their shared window. "Can you see to the south of Grand's hunting lodge?" "Yes, I see it." "That building they are constructing is going to be a small hotel for workers who work at the hotel and resort." Gabe then pointed farther south. "And do you see those red flags in the ground that span a large U-shaped area?" "Yes." The general contractor for this project staked out the land area needed to build a very large resort. In the middle piece of land, we'll build a few varied-sized swimming pools for adults and kids. Oh, and we'll add a health spa in there somewhere. Gabe looked over at Rory, whose eyes were glued below. "So, what do you think?" She turned to him, her eyes beaming and a smile hovering over her lips. "I think it's a really great thing you're doing, Gabe. You've put in a lot of work planning all this. I'm glad you showed me from way up here. Now I feel like I have a better perspective." "Yeah, it'll be good. The hardest part is getting the workers to stay and work on a quiet island that has no shops and very few people." Gabe rubbed the back of his neck. "Not exactly sure how to deal with that problem, but we're working on it." Rory put a finger on her chin, a sure sign she was thinking. "You could appeal to people's adventurous side. Promote it as a once-in-a-lifetime adventure. That would inspire more workers to come to the island." "You might be onto something, Rory. I'll have my human resources manager look into that idea." Gabe grinned. The plane descended onto the landing strip, and before long they were walking the trail towards Grand's hunting lodge. The loud blast of his private jet taking off surrounded them. Gabe had told his pilot and co-pilot to go ahead and fly to Seattle's airport to spend time with their families. He wouldn't need to fly again for a little while. His plane needed its routine mechanical inspection anyway, so leaving the airplane in the Stevenson private hangar would be ideal. Gabe's eyes rested on Rory as they approached Grand's lodge. He still thought of this home as Grand's special place, even though the island and the house now belonged to him. This would be the first time he was bringing Rory home as Mrs. Stevenson. The thought made him happy. He would hire a housekeeper and cook soon, preferably someone who wouldn't mind living in the small guest house behind the hunting lodge. He liked that idea. That way they would have someone to cook and clean, and Rory would have more time to write and formulate her skincare products, and he'd have more time with her too. It was ideal. She was always helping others. Maybe it was time his wife had someone to help her. As he walked up to the door, he remembered how his great-grandfather said, "When you marry, treat your wife like a princess and always have nice surprises up your sleeve." As they approached the front door, Gabe thought now was as good a time as any to listen to Grand. Stopping suddenly, he let go of the 2 suitcases he pulled along beside him. Placing one hand around Rory's waist and one under her legs, he lifted her up in his arms. "Gabe, what are you doing?" Rory gasped, and her jaw dropped open in surprise. Gabe chuckled as he opened the large wooden door. "Grand always told me when I married to treat my bride like a princess, so I thought carrying you across the threshold would be a step in the right direction." Rory giggled as he carried her through the open door and into the wide entryway of the hunting lodge. Gabe's smile grew bigger. He loved Rory's contagious laugh. He could listen to it all day. With slow movements, he slid his wife down against his body. Her pink mouth turned up at the corners into an enchanting smile. Those lips held such fond memories. Rory made him come alive in ways he never thought possible. For a moment, he didn't even think, but just pulled her close, leaning down to press his lips against hers. An explosion of moist warmth, the kind with a strawberry flavor, just like his grandmother's strawberry shortcake, met his lips, and in that moment he had the strongest sense that he'd come home. Gabe's thoughts spiraled. This couldn't be happening with Rory, his childhood friend. She was like a friend and a sister all rolled into one. As that thought entered his mind, just as suddenly as he had kissed her, he took a step back. His hands shook a little as nervous jitters hit him. Somewhere along the way, the importance of his wife in his life had shifted. She now meant more to him than he ever thought possible. He didn't know how to deal with that. Running his fingers through his hair, he changed the subject. I'm going to bring in our suitcases." Rory nodded quickly, her violet eyes wide and uncertain. With hurried steps, he walked out the door to get the suitcases. He felt like the worst kind of husband. Confusion gnawed at him, and he wondered if he would ever be able to figure out exactly what was happening between him and his fake wife. Rory stood motionless, touching gentle fingers to her lips. Gabe had surprised her again with his passionate kisses that had made her go weak in the knees. Just when she had wanted her husband's embrace to go on forever, he'd suddenly pulled away. He confused and frustrated her all at the same time. Yet her heart longed to be close to him. She wanted to experience more of her husband's kisses and to know and understand his heart. Rory expelled a long breath. She didn't know if what she longed for would ever happen, but she knew she would remain hopeful. Maybe he just needed a little more time to trust her fully. Rory reassured herself that if it took more time, that was okay. They had 1 year together. Maybe by the time the year was over, their fake marriage would turn into something real. Meanwhile, Rory would do her best to make this house into a home. Turning, she started down the hallway toward the large open kitchen. To her surprise, she saw a massive card planted on the rustic wood table. Gabe's footsteps echoed on the floor behind her. "It looks like it's a card from my family." Rory read the card out loud. "Congratulations to the happy couple. A little birdie told us you would be coming to Cyrus and Anna Noble's benefit gala on Friday next week. We would like to ask Rory if she would like to spend time with us girls at the spa and shopping for the day. Please let us know. Love from Mum, Al, Bella, and your grandmother." "That's very thoughtful of them to include me." Rory looked over at Gabe. "Yes, it was." Gabe set down the card. "Sorry, I forgot to mention the benefit gala next Friday evening. Cyrus asked me to speak. Will you come with me to the benefit?" Rory eyed Gabe, feeling a little uncomfortable with the thought of being in a room full of people who were so cultured and wealthy. She was just the barefoot island girl. How would she ever fit in? Rory tucked a stray hair behind her ear and licked her lips nervously. "Yes, if you want me there, of course I'll join you, Gabe." "I do want you there with me, Rory. You'll shine like a rare jewel in a vast sea of plastic cutouts." His rogue smile was back. While she appreciated his compliment, she didn't share his confidence. "But I don't have any kind of formal evening dress to wear." Rory hugged her arms around herself. If Gabe knew what her wardrobe really looked like, she was convinced he'd want to hide away in embarrassment. "From the invitation on this card, it looks like my family has decided to take care of that with an afternoon of shopping. Would you like to join them?" Gabe asked like it was the most normal thing in the world. Despite being scared to enter a world that she knew nothing of, The need to please her husband and her new family was greater. Yes, I think I would enjoy that. Good. I think you'll have fun, Rory. And make sure you buy not only an evening dress, but any other clothes or accessories that you need without looking at the price. I have credit cards and a bank card set up in your name, so no excuses. Promise me you'll do this? Gabe stood there with his arms crossed in front of him, his blue eyes focused on hers like a laser beam. He knew her well. All right, I promise. Rory realized she had entered a new world, a world where she didn't need to focus on how much things cost. For the first time, she would be able to shop for clothes and get what she liked. I'll ask your mom, grandmom, and Al and Bella for advice on what to buy so you can be proud to have me at your side. Gabe shook his head. I'm always proud to have you on my arm, Rory. He looked like he was about to say something else, but stopped. Thanks, Gabe. That means a lot. Rory turned to look around the room. Well, if you could show me to my room, I'll unpack my clothes. Her husband grabbed their suitcases and headed down the long, wide hallway. The rustic feel of the timber frame lodge, with its overhead beam, made her feel tiny and humble in the midst of all this vastness. She had a feeling this was only the beginning. This is your bedroom. Mine is right across the hall. Gabe opened the large wooden door and waited for her to enter. Rory walked inside, loving the light colors on the walls. This used to be my great-grandmother's room. Grand wanted to make sure my great-grandmother had all the space she needed when he built the house. It's beautiful, Gabe, and it's about 3 times the size of my room at the cottage. Rory looked up at him, pleased that he'd given her this room. I'll unpack, and then I'll make us a meal. Well, about that. Gabe placed a finger on his chin. I was thinking we could go to the cottage and visit your aunts. They would be pleased to see you. Rory grinned, excited at that idea. All right, let me just get this organized and then we can go. Gabe chuckled and left her to the task. It wasn't too long before she had changed into her comfy jeans and sweatshirt and went to meet Gabe. Rory carried a small bag of gifts she'd bought for her aunts from their trip. It wouldn't surprise me if Aunt Florrie has food already waiting. She's always cooking something. Soon they were on Gabe's ATV and driving down the trail toward the cottage. Aunt Mary ran out to meet them. Welcome, you 2 lovebirds. You came just in time. Aunt Florrie has just finished making the soup. Come in and sit by the table. Rory quirked an eyebrow at Gabe as if to say, I told you so. As they sat around the kitchen table, they said grace and started eating. Rory told them about their adventures from their trip to Argentina. Oh my, I'm glad the man was caught and sent to jail and that those girls and you both are safe, Aunt Fawn said softly, shaking her head. We were all fine, Auntie, and it turns out Maria's family was willing to work with me to help hand harvest sea plants so that I can formulate larger quantities of skin creams. At their curious looks, Rory explained, It was Gabe's idea and he encouraged me to get the help I need. Good, Gabe. I'm glad to hear it. And Rory, we are excited for you. I know so many of our friends and other people from Paradise Lake's weekly craft fairs have been asking when you would have more jars of cream available. This is perfect, Aunt Mary said. It was all Rory's doing. She's a force to be reckoned with. Gabe winked at Rory and she could feel warmth hitting her cheeks from his attention. Ever the practical one, Aunt Florrie shook her head as she pointed out the big obstacle in this new plan. How is Rory going to have the time to write, mix the formula for her skincare, and cook and clean that large house? It's too much. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Aunt Florrie. I've wanted to ask if there is anyone you trust that you would recommend as a housekeeper and cook for us. She could live in the 3-bedroom guest house for free, and we'd pay her well. Rory looked over at her husband, surprised. It seemed that, as usual, Gabe was 1 step ahead. I know of someone. She and I go way back, and I would trust her with my life. Aunt Mary grinned and clapped her hands together. Her name is Betty O'Toole. She's my age, widowed with 3 married children who live across the country. She's lonely, and this would be perfect for her. Plus, she'd be close by and could come to tea ever so often. Her 3 aunts nodded and looked over at Gabe. Rory, what do you say? Is that a good idea? Rory smiled, happy that he'd thought to ask her. Yes, I think it is. I've met Mrs. O'Toole, and she's a kind, warm-hearted person. I think she would be a great cook. Good. I can call and see if we can get that settled this week then. Aunt Mary spoke up. I can call Betty if you'd like. I can explain what you're offering, and then if she has questions, Betty can talk to Rory. Finishing their meal, Aunt Florrie filled up the kettle and set it on the stove to make tea. That sounds good, Aunt Mary. Thanks. Gabe toyed with his cup. I'm glad you're boiling the water for tea, Aunt Florrie. It reminds me of the present we brought back for you three. Some traditional Argentina mate herb tea, along with a gourd to use to pour the tea into. Rory pulled out the yellow gourd she had in her backpack and the numerous bags of tea leaves she had brought home with her. Rory, this is wonderful. Let's try some, shall we? Aunt Mary was always in the mood to try something new. Soon Aunt Florrie was pouring the boiling water into the yellow gourd, and the mate herb tea lingered at the top. Tradition says you're supposed to pass the tea around to each person. It's supposed to be a way of welcoming people to your home. Rory could see the doubtful expressions on her aunts' faces, but they were willing to give it a try. It's a little bitter, my dear. Aunt Mary added honey, and they all agreed it was a little easier to swallow. Speaking of presents, we have something for you too, Rory. We wanted to give you a birthday present a little early. Aunt Fawn nodded to Aunt Mary, who hurried up the stairs and returned carrying a bunch of tattered notebooks. She handed them to Rory and said, These are your mother's journals. She started writing them when she was a teenager. The last entry was dated the day before your 6th birthday. Rory's eyes moistened. A few tears slipped down her cheeks as she stared at the torn edges of the multicolored notebooks. These are my mom's words, she breathed out. So many questions filled her mind that she wasn't even sure where to start. We didn't feel like you were ready to read them until you were an adult, Rory. That's why we waited so long. We didn't mean to hurt you by holding them back. Once you read the diaries, you might agree that many of the personal things that your mom wrote in her diary were better left for adult ears only. Aunt Mary spoke softly. We hope you're not too upset with us. Rory reached a hand over to her aunt and squeezed it. No, Aunt Mary, I'm not upset. You were protecting me. Rory held the journals close to her heart. Thank you for this. Maybe some of the questions I have will be answered as I read my mom's words. I really hope so, my dear. Aunt Fawn patted her hand. Aunt Florrie spoke quickly. And one more thing. Another gift? Rory asked. Well, they are yours anyway, but we wondered if you'd like to take Mocha and Latte with you. They're your dogs more than they are ours. We thought we might get a small dog. Aunt Florrie smiled. What do you think, Gabe? Rory wanted to respect that it was Gabe's great-grandfather's home, and that he was okay with it. Sure, Rory, whatever you want, Gabe chuckled. I remember Grand had his dogs that he brought to the island in the summertime. I sure had fun with them. It might make the place feel more like home to have your furry friends around. Then I'd love that. A sense of happiness surrounded Rory. She was with Gabe and her aunts, and everything felt right in her world, at least for the moment. The sun started to go down, and Rory stood to her feet. I think we should probably get back. I want to grab my computer and a few things from my bedroom before we go. Rory hurried upstairs to her room and placed her computer and a few clothes inside her backpack. She looked around her room and realized that it would be a long time before she'd be back. Now she would live at her husband's home, at least for the next year. She felt nervous and excited all at the same time. Hurrying back downstairs, she saw Gabe by the back door talking with Aunt Mary. Latte and Mocha, here boys. Her dogs came quickly and sat on their haunches, waiting patiently as she slipped on her shoes. She patted their heads. They think they're going on a walk to the beach, which they love. This will be a whole new adventure for them. Rory was just about to slip on her backpack when Aunt Mary stopped her. Here are your mother's journals, my dear. There are about 12 of them. With shaky hands, Rory slipped the journals inside her backpack, blinking back tears. Thank you, Aunt Mary. Rory kissed her cheek and looked up to see her aunts close by. Come here, you three. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for all that you've done for me. The good news is we're nearby, so this isn't goodbye, but simply, I'll see you a little later. I will be back regularly to check on you all. After Rory had hugged and kissed all three of them, she followed Gabe out the door. Her aunts wiped the corners of their eyes and she blew them a kiss. She settled behind Gabe on the ATV. Ready to go? Gabe turned to ask above the noise of the engine. His eyes held a warm compassion that melted her heart, causing her eyes to moisten. It would be so strange to live with Gabe at the hunting lodge now. The location wasn't very far from where she'd grown up at the cottage, but it was the fact that she was living in this house as Gabe's wife. Well, his fake wife. It was all so new and a far grander lifestyle than she was used to. It made her a little afraid she wouldn't measure up. But she didn't want to weigh Gabe down with all her worries, so she simply said, "Yes, I'm ready to go." Rory waved once more to her aunts, and they hurried along the trail back home. Mocha and Lotte followed behind. With her arms around Gabe, some of the worry melted away, and she felt comforted. She could trust Gabe, her childhood friend, to help her through this. As they drove up to the hunting lodge, Rory spotted a man sitting on the front steps. Gabe stopped the ATV and turned off the engine. "Max, you're back." Gabe walked forward and shook his hand. Rory did the same. "What brings you by?" Her body tensed. She was sure Max had learned the identity of the person who started the fire. She braced herself for the worst. "I wanted to stop by to give you the results of the investigation. We had lab work done for the fingerprints we found on the jars from the fire." Max pulled out his smartphone and searched for his documents. "Yes, that's good." Gabe turned to Rory, his blue eyes filled with warmth. He grabbed her hand and squeezed gently. Rory gave him a hesitant half-smile in return. "What did you find?" How could her husband sound so calm? Rory grew anxious and keyed up as she waited for Max's reply. "The person identified is a man who goes by the name of Ned Baxter. He lives in Oregon." Max looked over at Rory and then at Gabe. "Does that name ring any bells?" Rory sighed in relief. "That name is not familiar to me, nor have I heard my aunts mention anyone by that name." "And I don't recognize that name at all," Gabe responded. He placed a finger on his chin, thinking, "That is strange. Here I thought we would uncover a bit of a clue. Do you know anything about this Ned fellow?" "Yes, it looks like he's a 22-year-old male who still lives with his mom. Her name is Nadine Baxter. That's all we have to go on for the moment." Max slipped his smartphone back in his pocket and stood there in silence. "Sorry we didn't find anything really useful. My team and I will dig deeper into the background of this Ned fellow, as well as his mother. I'll keep you informed of any new developments." Max looked beyond them toward the water. "We'll keep digging down to the truth. That's all I can tell you." "Well, I appreciate that, Max. We both do. We just want to put a stop to the senseless attacks against my wife. We have complete faith that you'll find something soon." Gabe shook Max's hand, as did Rory, and soon he was walking away. Rory slipped the backpack off her shoulders as they walked toward the house. "I wish we knew more information. Who is Ned Baxter, anyway? I've never heard of him." Gabe placed a gentle hand on her back as he opened the door. "I don't know. But I'm confident Max and his team will find more information soon." He grabbed her heavy backpack filled with journals and released a small chuckle. "And who knows? Maybe your mom left a clue in one of her journals." "Maybe," Rory nodded as she entered the house. But she had a feeling finding out the truth of who started the fire would only get more difficult before the whole story saw the light of day. Her body trembled as she thought about who they would discover was behind this. Rory could only hope they would uncover the truth soon.